Welcome back, everybody, to your final update on the state of the Malazan Empire. Yes, this is it. I finished Assail today, and thus all 22 currently available Malazan novels by Stephen Erickson and Cam Asselmond. Yes, there's novellas out there. I'm aware of the Corbel Broch and Bochelan novellas, but I can't get them in audio, and I have not, gotten to the point where I'm desperate enough to actually use my text-to-speech thing to go through those novellas. It may still happen, don't get me wrong, but for now, we're done with this. This is the end of a 1 year of Malazan reading. And yeah, that's sort of what we're going to talk about today. The last two chapters and the epilogue. And maybe I'll do like a full-on holy shit video tomorrow. We'll see. I'll have to think about that because, it's pretty overwhelming to reach that point, and I don't know what I'll do next year without any Malazan. We'll see. Anyway, let's get this started, shall we? Cheers. All right. So, we ended yesterday, chapter 13, with all the human battles being over, more or less. Even the attack of the Clan Emas on Mantle Keep was over, because the main threat was kind of finally on the table. That being the unveiling of Umtos, a full-on Umtos Felak ritual, somewhere up there in the mountains, probably by someone named Burai, whom we have met before. And that is the new big threat now. And so in the last two chapters, we mainly deal with people climbing up into the higher mountains to reach that forbidden place at the end of it all, where it all began. And that's sort of like what we deal with, right? Everyone goes to that place, that mythical place in the north, where the ancestors are, but also other things. And we kind of know what other things obviously are the Forkroll Assail, and we kind of deal with those for a bit as well. Anyway, that's sort of what we need to think about today. The plot obviously is like everyone goes there. We have the Crimson Guard revelation, which is obviously a sad one. And we have a new hope, so to speak. That's sort of, why I think this is a very dramatic, very emotional ending to the novels of the Malazan Empire, which is absolutely on par with what happens at the end of The Crippled God. Yes, these are only 6 novels, not 10, but man, do they hit home at the end. And we'll see what I can come up with while talking about that as well. So, first thing that we need to talk about for a second is what happens when Ormond comes up and meets Burai, and Burai is doing the Omtes Felak ritual. And the ritual obviously ends with Ormond using a boar's tooth, with the other name that I will not even try to pronounce, to kill Burai, because it's that sort of ritual that needs a lot of sacrifice. And the question of why Ormond has to do it, and the answer is we're coming back to the idea of blood price there, right? Because it is the blood price that Ormond is paying. It is him doing that, so none of his friends has to do it. It's sort of like that part of it is what happens now, and Ormond does it. Burai puts his lifeblood and energy and force into the ritual, and we get all of the insanity that comes with that. And I feel that's sort of like an interesting thing there. That is, like, sometimes we do things mainly because they have to be done, and we try to, spare others the the bites of conscience that might come from that, because I mean it's rarely as brutal as that kind of sacrifice and like it's rarely like a human sacrifice for a magical ritual, I assume. I mean, I don't know what you guys are doing, but I would say probably that's not the not the thing you mostly do, right? Anyway, the thing, however, remains the same. Someone has to do. We all have to do things. If we don't do specific things, then others will do them, and yeah, that's sort of the main thing behind that. That once again comes back to the idea of the blood price. Now, does that always involve things as dire as this? No, not really. But it kind of boils down to the fact, like, if you can do something that would, is not really good, not really fun for you, but like would also not be fun for anyone else, then why not just do it and spare that your friends? Because that's what it is about. It's like whatever, like, even if it's just like, household chores, which is a ridiculous way to break this down, but it kind of boils down to the same things. Like, do your thing and go from there. Yeah, there's that. The other side of that, obviously, is once again the idea how magic works in the Malazan world, and that like magic is transactional. That's something that we have in our world as well, right? You do magic. If you do magic, I don't. But the main important thing there is definitely that you need to. Yes, there is always a price for that, and for like large, because that's how, like, that's sort of like, I guess, the basis of any magic system. And I'm not going to go into the soft and hard magic thing again, but that's the basis of it always. It is an exchange. It is an exchange of energies, of life energy for something else, of, it's like whether it's your Gandalf who is like tired after locking a door or your Burai spilling his blood into the ground. And this is the other thing there, right? We once again see the connection of the Ice Bloods to their country, because the spear is punched through Burai into the ground, and that's when the whole thing like connects him back into the ground, into the ice that then flows downhill and takes down everything, sort of. All right, so there's that. What else is going on in these chapters? We come to the final meeting with the Jakku elder that actually starts the whole thing. And this is, once again, this novel works really well on that regard, because it spans the whole time, right? You remember, like, how in Memories of Ice we meet Pran Chol, who kind of then shows up here, and also shows up obviously in Gardens of the Moon. Well, Pran Chol, whatever you want to call him. Anyway, here we have remember the opening scene of the Tlanai Mass hunting the Jagged. That is the same conflict that ends here, right? Because Utel, or whatever his name is the same one that has a conversation with that Jagged elder, that then drops herself or falls off with the spear. That's the interesting thing there. With that spear that becomes Boar's Tooth at the end. That drops off the ridge once she sets the Forkrul Assail on the Tlanai Mass. So the entire that opening scene from the prologue ends the whole thing here again, because everyone meets back there, and there's symmetry in that, obviously, but there's more than that, and that's sort of, I feel, there's a bunch of things going on here, but that's sort of the circularity of it all. It's like you make that mistake, and thousands of years later you get a second chance to maybe don't make that mistake again. And that is obviously when we have the scene with mostly with Silver Fox and with the four races. Well, what do you want to call 4 races? Meeting there to forge another peace with the Jagut and the Forkrul Assail and the Taste and the Eye and the Tlanai Mass. That's where that ancient wrong that kind of started the whole thing back at the beginning of this book, Assail, um, ends, because finally people understand. Now, there's an interesting thing, however, and that is the tragedy of the Talani Mass is probably worth their own long video. Maybe I'll come back to that at some point. But the thing here that we need to look at here is the difference between Lana's Tog and Utel, whatever his name is, because she knows that there is a future, not a future, but like there's a hope for the Talani Mass, which is obviously the realm forged and at the end of Memories of Ice, which connects the events of like the Malazan Book of the Fallen further to the novels of Malazan Empire. But she withheld that truth from the Kurlum, so the Kurlum were still as much trapped in their despair and hatred, which led, helped to rile them up to kill all these other people to fulfill their vow, because they thought that like killing every single surviving Jaghut would maybe also end the vow. They didn't even know about the fact. They didn't even know about the option that that they could do something else. And there's two things to be learned from that. The one is, well, they're kind of connected, but the one thing is obviously that that even though it is difficult to speak of, history of like great men or great women in that case, where like one individual has intense power over, or like can influence history in a gigantic way. And that's not how history works in general, but there have always been, and there will always be, situations where one individual, because of whatever personal reasons, will be able to lead an entire group of people into terrible deeds, right? Whether it is, your like typical cult leader, your Charles Mansons or whatever, or your fascist politicians, and that's something to be aware of, to see what kind of personal motives people have that preach radical solutions, or not radical solutions, or even like preach any form of radical action. Because sometimes those are not the best motives, right? So that's one thing that we can learn from this. The other is that is withholding of information, because that's how this works. She doesn't tell them. That's how she manipulates them. Withholding of information, no matter in what situation, is always a crime. Will always make people's decisions more fraught, because to make good decisions, ideally we would go and use all the knowledge that we have in our disposal, all the facts, all that stuff. But if we don't have vital information, our decisions will be something that we'll regret later on. And yes, the value of information information withheld is something that we can see here in Lana's Tog's actions. And once she's found out, obviously she is banished, and we'll see what becomes of. We don't know what will become of her. But anyway, that's one thing that I found interesting to look at. All right, let us talk about the Crimson Guard, shall we? So, the Crimson Guard are basically Talani Mass by now, because the vow of the Crimson Guard echoed the one of the Talani Mass, and because of whatever reasons, no one really knows, it kind of turn them into Talani Mass. And there we are. Now, I want to look back at, like, one thing here, and that is like how throughout the novels of the Malazan Empire, Cam Asselmont is building up to that revelation, and how once you read these books for the second time, like I've done right now, it is very, very obvious that is where he's going. There's like really a lot of like hints and whatnot out there but it's also very easy to overlook them. It's the whole thing that, you know, when I said yesterday that there's like one scene in chapter 13 or 12 where it's very obvious, what I meant is the scene with Mist, right? When the Talana Mass show up, the Carloom, to kill her and her sons. She's like, that there was something that she can feel, a power that is similar to the one that she just like sent away, which is obviously, you know, the Crimson Guard, when she sent those away. So there's like all these like different hints that something is going on. Shimmer being, Shimmer feeling cold once she, you know, gets dragged up after the ice falls, and then obviously the ice falling on their ship is because they are connected to the Lanai Mass. The ice is obviously, a barrier or a protective measure by the Jaghut. So obviously that's how that works. But it's all these things that are hidden in there and make just as much fun. It's just as much fun as all the hidden, or not really hidden, but hidden in plain sight kind of information that we get in the Malazan Book of the Fallen by Stephen Erickson. It's just the same way, and there's like two things to be seen here that I find fascinating, and not two, but maybe one, and that is, but it works on both sides, and that is how we can be willfully ignorant. And Shimmer is the best character for that. Exactly, right? Like that's how that, because it is sort of hidden in plain sight for the other like members of the Crimson Guard to find out. We have people like, you know, Blues and whenever Blues died, I don't know, Calbrin, and they kind of, some of them know, some of them are trying to figure it out. And some of them are trying not to figure it out. And it is something that we as people tend to do. You know, we have the capacity to ignore things, to willfully ignore hints that may lead to a revelation that we kind of don't want. And that's something that we can see here. And I feel the way that it is easy for us as readers to overlook those hints parallels the way it is extremely easy for not really easy, but it's in the way it is also Shimmer is also able to overlook those hints. And that's something that once again I find very fascinating, because both Stephen Erickson's Malazan Book of the Fallen and Cam Esselman's novels of the Malazan Empire are a performative thing. It's like we go through a journey when we read those books. We learn something and we change, and we connect to people in those books in all kinds of ways. And that's something that we can see here, and I find that very fascinating. Obviously also the big tragedy of the Crimson Guard, of an action taken back then without foreseeing the consequences, and dealing with those consequences is obviously a huge thing to be thought about, and I might want to look at that in more detail in a different situation. But it's something that I feel is important to understand, because we have a lot of fantasy stories where a mistake lies at the bottom of the plot, right? It's like your Wizard of Earthsea, Sparrowhawk, whatever his name actually is. It's like he kind of separates from his shadow, and it's like, and that's the mistake that kind of starts the plot. For the Crimson Guard, it's that like vow of vengeance that starts the whole thing. For the Clan Mass, it's the same thing. It's like we don't always foresee the consequences of our actions. And the question then is, if we choose and if we act the best of our knowledge in that situation, can we be blamed, or should we blame ourselves if those actions turn out to have devastating consequences, if those consequences were not foreseeable by us in that situation? That's obviously a question that haunts a lot of, especially the novels of the Malazan Empire. You know, it's the whole, and it's explicitly once again here and at the end of Assail, like choices were made, and the important thing is that they were made, and that kind of echoes with Stonewielder and the conversation like, are those good actions or bad actions? And the worst action is inaction. And that's like one of the things that Cam Esselmont adds to the Malazan corpus in a way, where Stephen Erickson is very much focusing on empathy and compassion in his books, and that's absolutely important, amazing, and whatnot. But Cam Esselmont adds other facets. Cam Esselmont adds hope, definitely hope for the future, and that whole question of like what constitutes a good action or a bad action, how we deal with choices, and the fact that we should rather act than not act. That's very much the thing that we see with Cam Esselmont adding to the whole thing. Yeah, I agree. I tend to agree with that. All right. What else? Well, we have the actions of the Malazans down there helping out with the heir of Ronald the Bastard, and everyone working together to avoid or at least fend off a, well, supernatural disaster, but still a natural disaster, which kind of, echoes a lot of these. It kind of echoes stuff that happens in The God Is Not Willing in a different way, right? It's like that idea of helping refugees to, work together and save human lives. And that is the fundamental humanity of the Malazan world, is that as grim and as brutal and as fucked up as so many parts of this world are, and there's a lot of fucked up stuff going on in the Malazan universe, because people are people, and people are not perfect, and a lot of us are actually arseholes, to put it mildly. There is still always that hope that we can rise above that and do the right thing, or at least the thing that is close to the right thing in a situation, which is exactly what the Malazans do when they make their stand there once again. Well, that conversation with Mal and Carthron's like, yeah, we defend against the Talani Mass, and then we help defend the fortress against the ice and all of that. So that's what makes Malazan as a world in general, whether it's Erickson or Esselmont writing, different from the whole grimdark thing. I'll go down into the grimdark discussion again at some point, I suspect. Maybe if I read a lot of Mark Lawrence, because I've heard that stuff's also pretty grimdark. Anyway, my point is that potential, that uplifting potential of the Malazan world, whether it is the Marines helping the refugees at the end of The God Is Not Willing, whether it is Carthron and his gang helping the surviving lowlanders in Mantle Keep, whether it is, well, in its most brutal way, near the end of The Crippled God, the Bone Hunters helping the Children of the Snake. That is something that makes, at least for me, makes Malazan as a whole stand out, because it is a world where that is always possible, where that actually happens. And it is the incredible skill of both Cam Esselmont and Stephen Erickson to write stories like that, to have people act like that, and make it actually feel right, and make it actually feel like also dramatically appropriate, right? It does not come across as cheesy or as too much of a I don't know, lesson on how to be human or whatever. It is that in like very, very bold letters, but it is still it actually works as a story at the same time. You remember, like you see your inspirational like movies or read inspirational stories and whatnot, and it always feels a bit like forced or whatever. Malazan doesn't feel forced, and it works, and that's something that I feel makes these books so incredibly powerful, all of them. the whole tragedy of like the whole, I don't know, especially with Assail at the end now, I feel like the crippled god is extremely epic at the end and all of that stuff. But what Kem Asselmont manages with Assail near the end is just as powerful, is just as emotionally moving, at least to me, and in all its sides. And he adds bits that were missing at the crippled god. The idea that there is a world afterwards, that people like Ormond and the Icebloods get a chance to actually create their new home, and the Talana Mass get a way out of this world, which means, the Summoner and Silver Fox and Kalava, at least as long as they can stand each other, wander the world to find every single Talana Mass, because no one gets left behind. Which once again shows that there is still humanity in the Talana Mass at this point, because no one gets left behind. Everyone should get that hope for redemption, that chance at redemption. Redemption is that other big theme, obviously, that almost everyone deserves a chance at redemption. Well, almost everyone. But so that's another big powerful theme here at the end that once again, this is just like really, really good and really powerful. It moves me a lot when I read these kind of books. I'm crying while reading these kind of books, whether it is here or yesterday when we have the end of Kull, Heel, and Yolvaik, I think it's her name, Heel. That kind of stuff is, it makes me cry because it's so good and it's so raw and emotional in a lot of ways. Now there's a bunch of things that I want to check out before we leave this for tonight. I unfortunately have other stuff to do as well. And those things are basically, one, a meta-commentary on the truth of fiction. When we have the conversation between Kyle and Fisher, about how Fisher would write that story, and the fact that the poetic truth is a higher truth or a different truth than the stuff that actually happened on the ground. And Fisher just goes, at some point, Kyle just saying, so you'll just make stuff up and claim that's the truth. I think that's very much a commentary on, once again, the value of fiction. Because the value of fiction exactly is that. It's like, there is a truth hidden in there. There's a bunch of truths hidden in there. Just as there are truths hidden in mythology or even in historiography. The point, however, is that as soon as you write these things down, you make that your own perspective and you take license. You choose which things to put in, which things to keep out, and so forth, to bring across your point, those truths, those higher truths. And that's the poetic truth that is in there, the poetic knowledge that is in there. And it's, that conversation I feel is very much a commentary on, once again, the value of fantasy stories. Because in a way, we're kind of reading exactly those tales that Fisher Kaltath is telling. It's more explicit in, Carcanas, where you have that other, meta level in there with also Blind Galan. But still, the idea is those stories are told to us to make points. There are truths hidden in those stories. And they may not be exactly how events were at the gaming table, which is sort of, I guess, the grubby real events behind all of that are basically the gaming table. But you know what I mean? No, you change them. You mold them into that higher truth, that poetic truth. I wouldn't call it higher, but that deeper meaning or whatever. And it's okay to do that, to take poetic license. That's why we have poets. That's why we have bards. That's why we have writers, authors these days. That's exactly why we have that, to make those truths easier for us to pick up on. and mold them in a way, or like cast them in a way that makes it easier for us to pick them up and not get sidetracked by all the grubbiness that is actual real human life. Which doesn't mean that actual real human life doesn't exist. It's just like sometimes we need to have those things written larger than life. Another thing that I just found really interesting, and I personally really loved, is the idea that Fisher is playing a kantele, well, which I assume is, because the way it's described, is a kantele, which is the traditional Finnish instrument of Finnish mythology, which is very much what all like, and that's, I guess, is another like tie back to the roots of like contemporary or modern fantasy literature, right? Because the one person who got inspired heavily by the Finnish mythology of the Kalevala, or Kalevala, I think is the way to pronounce it. Who knows? Well, Finnish people that I could probably ask. Point is, those are very much based on songs, and those songs are often played on kanteles. And I actually do own one. I should probably maybe get it refurbished at some point so I can actually play on it. Anyway, that would be interesting. My point is that the one person inspired by the Kalevala, heavily inspired by it, almost ripping off stories directly, was J.R.R. Tolkien. It's very pronounced in the Silmarillion, but it's all over the place. Elvish language oftentimes sounds a bit like Finnish and stuff like that as well. So we have Fisher going back to the Ice Bloods being that old like Jaghood related kind of people. This is like an old instrument, having that root in like that specific instrument feels a bit like a nod to that strain of fantasy literature. The the Finnish and then Tolkien tradition, as opposed to also the sword and sorcery tradition that we have seen heavily shown off in all kinds of parts of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. So I just really liked that aspect of it. That's something that I personally, yes, appreciated. All right, so what else? I will not answer the Jethys question. I assume that one will be left unanswered forever and ever and ever. I just want to end this for today with just a few like final reflections on like how all of this works. I do appreciate the fact that the Letherii get run over by the ice, which, they fucking deserve it. But also the way it looks at it before we get like, for that one time we actually get Marshal Teal's view. And that's important to understand. And I've said it before, like the Letherii, God, it's my voice today. The Letherii are obviously a criticism of the most materialist aspects of our society, weighing everything in prices and so forth. And what I appreciate about it is that while that is the case, it's reprehensible as fuck, at the end, when Teal dies, just as in that situation with Erky, the Bone Right, there is still humanity behind it, below that. And that is important to understand, because that means that even those, like, gone so deep down into that like materialist capitalist system still have a chance at redemption, have a chance at rediscovering their humanity and dignity, and ending in dignity, with dignity, like Teal does at the end of it. So there's that, and I very much appreciate that. So I feel the end of Assail as a whole is something that has moved me again. for something as dramatic as it is near the end, it also offers a lot of like light and hope. There are new beginnings for a lot of these people. They get like another chance. And the final thing there is, be human. Reach out. Be emotional. That's sort of the end with Shimmer, right? We have that situation when Shimmer realized that now that she is dead, she maybe has missed her chance. And that's I feel the last like big appeal that kind of goes into the same range as empathy and compassion in the Malazan Book of the Fallen go, but it goes beyond that. It's like, be emotional, be passionate, show that, show those emotions, show those passions, give them to the people around you, give them to the people that you care for before it's too late. Be human, and you may have a future. Well, that's it for me rambling chapter by chapter and so forth about the Malazan Book of the Fallen, the Carcanos trilogy, the Path to Ascendancy, the First Book of Witness, and now the novels of the Malazan Empire. I would not have thought that I could do all of that. I've done it. If you have stayed with me all the way to here, you have my undying respect and gratitude. I'm so thankful for that. Yeah. Thanks. It's the end of the year. I wish you the best for the year 2022. I'll maybe do another video wrapping the whole thing up. We'll see. And until then, have a great day. Cheers.